Hi, I'm Claire and today is all about reading goals. I'm going to look back on the reading goals I made for 2019, see how I did with them, and then set new goals for 2020. This is always one of my favorite videos to do out of the kind of end of year, beginning of a new year videos on BookTube, so I'm very excited to dive in. Last year I made 5 goals only. That's quite a low number for me, but I decided that I would be kind to myself and focus on goals that show progress from the year before rather than kind of like lofty ambitious goals, and that worked super well for me, so I'm going to continue focusing on only 5 main reading goals. My first goal for 2019 was to complete my Goodreads challenge to read 52 books in the whole year. I am currently on 57 books and it is Boxing Day today, the 26th of December. I still have a few more days to finish some things. Christmas has been a little bit hectic, but I'm going to travel to my parents soon, so there's a flight and stuff in there, so hopefully a little bit more reading. But in any case, I have smashed this goal. I didn't at all have to kind of scramble and make sure to read like a bunch of comics at the end of the year to finish it. I finished my reading goal in like mid-November and it felt amazing to not be worrying about it, to not be scrambling to finish the year by reading super short things. I mean, I'm very happy with how much I read this year, and that is also due to my second reading goal, which was to read half and half between novels and shorter things in the year. And I did about 50-50 on this. I read a few more shorter things than novels, but out of 57 books right now, I've got 25 novels that I've read, 2 that I'm currently reading, and 32 shorter things, so novellas, comics. I don't really put short stories, individual short stories in my Goodreads list, but that's more because I don't read a lot of individual short stories. I'm really happy with that balance. I'm going to keep trying to do a 50-50 balance between novels and shorter works, but I'm not going to put it in my goals this year because I feel like I'm doing that fairly well without actually explicitly making it a goal. I think what I'm going to try and do, again just kind of informally, is to alternate more between novels and shorter things. Earlier this year I read like 10 shorter things to start the year because I was in a bit of a slump, and now at the end of the year I've been reading mostly novels, so it's really slowed down. So I think I'm going to try and mix it up a little bit so I have more of a consistent amount. My third reading goal for 2019 was to make sure that at least 20% of my reading, that's a fifth of the book that I read, would be by authors of color. That's because people of color are wildly underrepresented in the publishing industry and in books that get published in general. I just want to make sure that I'm actually incorporating books by authors of color into my reading because there are so many books. It can be really easy to miss things if you're not making like an actual effort to pick things up. Anyway, in 2019 I read 15 books by authors of color, and that's out of 57, so that's roughly 26%, which means I did hit my goal of 20%. I'm very happy about that. I'm going to carry this goal into 2020, but slightly modified. I will come back to it in a minute. Now, for my next goal, I wanted to read 40% books by new to me authors. Just make sure I keep discovering new authors that I didn't know before, and I thought 40% would be a good amount. Now, I totally didn't like track this or pay attention or try to specifically read books by new people to meet this goal, and yet I still completely smashed it, so I'm really happy with myself. I read 29 books by new to me authors out of 57. I don't know if people think that's a lot for like what they read and how much of a proportion of new versus known authors they read, but for me that's a really good increase from previous years. That's 51% of my reading by new to me authors, and actually the 2 books that I'm reading right now are by new to me authors, so if I do manage to read those before 2020, that will up that a little bit more. So I'm really happy about that, and I don't think I'm going to put this goal back on for 2020 because I wasn't at all paying attention and I still smashed it by like an extra 10%. So 50-50 for me, books by authors that I know and new authors is really, really great. I discovered loads of great authors this year. I'm going to try and continue that in 2020, but more informally, and if I feel like by the end of the year that's not enough, I can look at putting it back on the reading goals for further years. Now, my final reading goal for 2019 was to get rid of 50 unread books. Mostly, I only achieved this goal of getting rid of 50 unread books by doing this massive KonMari unhaul, which I have a whole video about. You can go and check it out if you haven't seen it yet. I took a whole day, went through all of my books, got rid of anything that I didn't think I would want to reread if I'd already read it, anything that I wasn't really excited to read, anything that I thought I could get from the library pretty easily if I wanted to pick it up in future, anything where I had bought it ages and ages back and I wasn't really that into the idea of it anymore. All of those things I kind of decided to part with and donate, and so now I have a TBR that fits on a single TBR shelf. So I have achieved my 2019 goal of getting rid of 50 unread books, and I have also actually achieved my kind of like vaguely formed in future wouldn't it be great if kind of goal of having all of my TBR on one single physical shelf in the house, all in one place. However, I kind of got there in a bit of a roundabout way by just doing the KonMari video, and I wish I had gotten there by reading more of my actual TBR shelf this year. So that's one goal that I want to take into 2020, to read some actual TBR books. But speaking of goals for 2020, now that we've gone through all of the 2019 goals, let's talk about 2020. Now, in 2019, the way that I set a lot of my goals was to see how well I'd done at those goals in 2018 and then raise it by 2 books or 2% or something like that, like a really small increment, and then see how that went. That went really well for me, so I'm going to carry on with that idea. Now, my goals for 2020. First, for my Goodreads goal, I am going to set it to 60 books. Now, at the moment, I've read 57 books. I might end up reading more before the end of the year. If I do read like more than the 2 books that I'm currently reading, if I do get to 60, I might put it up by a couple, just so that I carry on with that idea of setting my goals, progressing from the previous year. So we'll see about that. My next goal for 2020 is to make sure that 30% of the books that I read are by people of color. This is just carrying this goal forward from last year. I did 26%. I'm just raising it by a few percentage points, rounding up to the next 30% books by authors of color seems eminently doable, and that feeds directly into my next reading goal, number 3 for 2020, which is to make sure that at least half of those books by authors of color are by authors that are new to me. What I noticed when I looked through my reading from 2019 is that I had done pretty well at reading new to me authors in general, but when I looked at the subset of books that I read that were by authors of color, I found that I had much fewer new authors there. I was rereading authors that I already knew and knew that I liked, and I wasn't discovering as many new authors of color that I would want to keep reading in future. And that discrepancy was really pronounced. If the percentages lined up, I would expect to have read 50% known to me previously authors of color and then 50% new to me authors of color, and in fact the percentage was 13%. 13% new to me authors of color, which means that I'm missing out on discovering a lot of new amazing authors that I probably would love, and it also means that I'm shooting myself in the foot a little bit for things like, you know, achieving this year's goal of reading 30% books by authors of color. Anyway, that's reading goal number 3 for 2020. I hope I explained that right. It made sense in my head, but I don't know how well I've conveyed it. please feel free as ever to ask questions in the comments below. My next goal is once again not very well quantified, but it is that by the end of the year I would like to have fewer unread books on my physical TBR shelf than I do right now. I'm gonna keep track of what comes onto the TBR and what comes out of the TBR being read or unhauled. I'm gonna keep track of that this year very carefully, and then by the end of the year we will see how well I have done. I'm not putting a number on it, I'm just saying fewer physical books by the end of the year that I have not read, because I do think that I will have a lot more fun with my TBR if I read the stuff on it like fairly soon after I acquire it, instead of letting it wait for years and years and years. And my final goal for 2020 is to improve my NetGalley ratio. Now, for those of you who don't know NetGalley, it's a website where publishers and reviewers can work together. Publishers will upload review copies of their upcoming books in ebook format, and then reviewers can request access to those books to read and review. Now, there is a thing called the NetGalley ratio, which is like the amount of books you have access to versus the amount of books that you have actually reviewed. So basically the idea is, if a publisher gives you access to a book to review, they want to know how likely it is that you will actually review it. NetGalley recommends that you have a ratio of about 80%, which I think is incredibly high. But that is because my NetGalley ratio is down the toilet at 21%. Now 21% isn't very good, but I have been on NetGalley for over 5 years. I've requested access to many different things, and in the past there are a lot of things that I wasn't granted access to, and the things that I did get granted access to weren't necessarily like my first priority, most interesting things that I definitely wanted to get to, and that's why a lot of those things haven't gotten reviewed yet. There's a lot of things that I have now on my NetGalley account that I requested 3 years ago that I'm really not interested in, so I'm going to try and put a line over that, just pick the books that I have on my NetGalley that I'm still interested in, try and read those and review those this year, and then also try and keep up with new books that I request on NetGalley and make sure that these books get reviewed in a timely way so as to improve my ratio. I have set the goal for this year, improving my ratio from 21% to 50%. Yes, it does sound bonkers, but I've never been a massive NetGalley user because the ratio in the past has really stressed me out, and there's a lot of things that I requested and didn't get access to, so I only have 47 books total on my NetGalley. I've reviewed 10, I've got 37 that need reviews. Out of those, a good bunch of them are 2019 releases and 2020 releases. A lot of those I know that I still want to read, still want to review. I think there's a good amount of work that can be done there. There's one or two things that I've actually already read and already talked about on the channel. I just didn't get my ducks in a row to go talk about them on NetGalley, so hopefully it's not too like wildly ambitious of a goal. It is my only kind of goal this year that's quite high in terms of numbers, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, all of that aside, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below if you've got any reading goals for 2020, what it is that you are hoping to accomplish book-wise in this upcoming year. If you'd like to see more from me, you can check out a previous video on screen right now. And if you haven't yet, please hit the subscribe button that's on my face for a new video from me every week. I've been Claire, thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.